I'm Harper Johnson, 24 years old. And 3 months ago, the most devastating thing happened to me. I got a text message from my dad that literally changed my entire life. But what my own family did next was even worse. If you've ever felt completely abandoned by the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally, please let me know where you're watching from, and subscribe to join others who understand this kind of family betrayal. Before I tell you about that message, I need you to understand how I got here. 4 years ago, I was working as a barista at this little coffee shop downtown called The Daily Grind. I was saving every penny to finish my marketing degree, living in this tiny studio apartment above a Vietnamese restaurant. The smell of pho broth would wake me up every morning at 5 a.m., but honestly, I loved it. It felt like freedom. That's where I met Jake. He came in every Tuesday and Thursday at exactly 2:15 p.m., always ordered a large black coffee with 1 sugar, and always left a $2 tip, even though his coffee was only $3.50. He had these intense brown eyes and wore the same faded denim jacket every single time. For 3 weeks, I worked up the courage to say something beyond "here's your coffee." Finally, on a rainy Thursday in October, he stayed an extra 10 minutes because the downpour was so heavy. I asked if he wanted to wait it out with a free refill, and he smiled this crooked smile and said, "Only if you'll sit with me for 5 minutes." Those 5 minutes turned into 2 hours. We talked about everything: his job as a graphic designer, my dreams of starting my own marketing firm, our mutual obsession with true crime podcasts, and our shared hatred of pineapple on pizza. He told me about growing up with 3 sisters who taught him how to braid hair and paint nails. I told him about my dad's strict rules and my mom's constant worry about what the neighbors would think. When the rain stopped, Jake asked for my number by writing it on a napkin with one of those stubby golf pencils. I still have that napkin in my jewelry box. Our first real date was at this hole-in-the-wall Mexican place, where the salsa was so spicy it made us both cry, but we couldn't stop laughing. Jake told me I had a piece of cilantro in my teeth, and instead of being embarrassed, I felt grateful that he cared enough to tell me. That night, I knew I was falling for someone who would always have my back. For the next 3 years, Jake and I built something beautiful together. We moved in together after 8 months, a 1-bedroom apartment in Riverside with hardwood floors and a tiny balcony where we grew tomatoes and basil. Jake would make me coffee every morning in this chipped blue mug I bought at a thrift store, and he'd leave little sticky notes in my textbooks with encouraging messages or terrible puns. "You're going to nail this marketing exam, but not as much as I'm nailing this breakfast burrito joke," he wrote once. We had our Friday night ritual of ordering Chinese takeout and watching Netflix documentaries. Jake always let me pick, even though I knew he secretly wanted to watch action movies. We'd spread out on our secondhand couch with the torn cushion, sharing lo mein straight from the container, and debating whether the serial killer was obvious from episode 1. These weren't Instagram-worthy moments, but they were ours. Jake helped me study for my finals, quizzing me with homemade flashcards while I paced around our kitchen island. When I graduated summa cum laude, he surprised me with a celebration dinner at the nicest restaurant in town, this place with cloth napkins and a wine list thicker than my textbooks. He'd been saving for 2 months for that meal, and when I found out, I cried happy tears into my overpriced pasta. I landed my first marketing job at a mid-sized tech company downtown. The salary wasn't huge, but it was steady, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was building something real. Jake got promoted to senior designer around the same time, and suddenly we were this young couple with actual careers and a future. We started talking about engagement rings and maybe getting a dog. We looked at apartments with 2 bedrooms, imagining one as an office and maybe someday a nursery. Life felt solid, predictable in the best way. I'd wake up to Jake already brewing coffee, kiss him goodbye as he headed to his office downtown, spend my days creating social media campaigns for software companies, then come home to find him on the couch sketching logos or playing guitar. We'd cook dinner together, nothing fancy, usually pasta or stir-fry, and talk about our days. I felt safe. I felt loved. I felt like I'd finally figured out how to be an adult, but there were tiny cracks I should have noticed. My dad's phone calls became more frequent, always asking about my finances, my relationship, my long-term plans. Mom would text me articles about women my age who were settling down and making smart choices. During family dinners, there were these loaded silences when Jake and I would mention our future together. My younger sister Emma would roll her eyes whenever I talked about work, muttering something about playing house when she thought I couldn't hear. The morning everything changed started normally. I woke up to the sound of Jake's alarm at 6:30 a.m., rolled over to find his side of the bed still warm but empty, The coffee was already brewing. He'd set the timer the night before, like always. I could hear him in the shower, humming some song I didn't recognize. I checked my phone for the weather, scrolled through Instagram for a few minutes, then got up to make us both breakfast. That's when I saw the text message from my dad, sent at 6:47 a.m. We changed all the locks on the front door and also the gate code. We no longer consider you part of this family until you make better choices. Don't contact us until you're ready to be responsible. I stood there in our kitchen, wearing Jake's oversized Northwestern t-shirt and my fuzzy socks, staring at those words until they blurred together. The coffee maker beeped that it was done brewing, and I jumped like someone had fired a gun. My hands started shaking so hard I had to set my phone down on the counter. You need to understand, my family has always been controlling, but this felt different. This felt final. I'd been living independently for 4 years, paying my own bills, building my own life, but apparently, that wasn't enough. I wasn't making the right choices according to their standards, and now I was being completely cut off. Jake found me 20 minutes later, still standing in the same spot, still staring at my phone. The coffee had gotten cold, and I hadn't even started breakfast. He took one look at my face and immediately wrapped his arms around me, not asking questions, just holding me until I could breathe normally again. That's when I knew, whatever my family thought about my choices, Jake was the right one. The thing about my family is that love has always come with conditions. Growing up, my father, Richard Johnson, ran our household like a military operation. Dinner was at 6 p.m. sharp every night, homework was completed before any leisure activities, and questioning his decisions was met with long lectures about respect and family hierarchy. My mother, Patricia, played the role of supportive wife, but behind closed doors, she'd whisper warnings about not upsetting Dad and keeping peace at all costs. I have 2 siblings, my older brother Levi, who followed Dad's blueprint perfectly by becoming a banker and marrying his college girlfriend right after graduation, and my younger sister Emma, who was still in high school and desperately trying to earn Dad's approval by getting perfect grades and never causing trouble. Levi was the golden child, the one who called every Sunday and asked Dad's opinion about everything from his mortgage rate to his wife's career choices. Emma was the baby, protected and coddled, but also controlled down to what extracurricular activities she could join. I was the middle child, the one who asked too many questions and pushed too many boundaries. When I was 16, I got detention for standing up to a teacher who was bullying a classmate with a learning disability. Instead of being proud that I'd defended someone vulnerable, Dad grounded me for 2 weeks for being disrespectful to authority. When I was 18 and got accepted to 3 different colleges, Dad tried to convince me to choose the one closest to home so I could live at home and save money. When I chose the school 4 hours away instead, he called it selfish and financially irresponsible. The pattern was always the same. I'd make a choice based on my own values and goals, and Dad would find a way to make it about disrespect, irresponsibility, or selfishness. Mom would play mediator, asking me to try to see his perspective and think about the family. Levi would stay neutral, and Emma would watch it all with wide eyes, learning that keeping Dad happy was more important than being authentic. When I started dating Jake, the disapproval was immediate but subtle. Dad never said he didn't like Jake, but he'd make comments about focusing on your career first and not getting too serious too young. Mom would ask pointed questions about Jake's family background, his job prospects, his intentions. During family dinners, they'd include Jake in conversations, but somehow make it clear he was an outsider, a temporary fixture in my life, rather than someone I was building a future with. The worst part was how they'd position their criticism as concern. "We just want what's best for you, sweetheart," Mom would say, after Dad had spent 20 minutes explaining why moving in with Jake was a mistake. "You're so young, and there's so much you haven't experienced yet," Dad would add, as if living with someone I loved was somehow limiting my options rather than expanding them. They had this way of making me doubt my own judgment. After every family gathering, I'd leave feeling confused and guilty, wondering if maybe they were right, maybe I was being naive or reckless. It took months of Jake patiently listening to me work through these feelings before I realized that healthy parents don't make you feel guilty for being happy. The day I got that text message, I was supposed to attend my cousin Sarah's baby shower that afternoon. It was being held at my parents' house, the same house I'd apparently been locked out of. I'd bought a gift 3 weeks earlier, a beautiful hand-knitted blanket from this boutique downtown that cost me 2 weeks of coffee money. I'd been looking forward to seeing my extended family, especially my Aunt Linda, who always asked about my job and seemed genuinely interested in my life. But now, staring at that text, I realized I couldn't go. How do you show up to a family event when your own parents have just disowned you? How do you pretend everything is normal when you've been explicitly told you're no longer considered part of the family? I called my mom first, thinking maybe this was Dad's extreme reaction, and she'd be the voice of reason. The phone rang 4 times before she answered, and I could hear the familiar sounds of party preparation in the background. Chairs being moved, dishes clinking, the distant hum of multiple conversations. "Oh, Harper," she said when she heard my voice, and there was something in her tone that made my stomach drop. "I was wondering when you'd call. Mom, I got this text from Dad, and I don't understand what's happening. What choices is he talking about? Why would you change the locks?" There was a long pause, and I could hear her walking away from the noise, probably stepping into the laundry room, where she always went for private conversations. "Honey, your father and I have been talking, and we're concerned about the direction your life is taking. You're 24 years old, living with a man you're not married to, spending money on things like expensive dinners and vacations instead of saving for your future. We feel like you're not taking life seriously." The audacity of it hit me like a physical blow. They were criticizing me for living with Jake, but Levi had lived with his now wife for 2 years before they got engaged, and that was somehow different because they had a timeline and were planning for marriage. They were upset about expensive dinners I paid for with money I earned at my full-time job, while Levi regularly posted photos from weekend trips to wine country and ski resorts. "Mom, I have a college degree, a steady job, and I pay all my own bills. How is that not taking life seriously?" "It's not about the money, sweetheart. It's about priorities. It's about making choices that show maturity and respect for family values. Your father feels like you're choosing Jake over family, and frankly, so do I." That's when I understood. This wasn't about my life choices at all. This was about control. As long as I was single and financially dependent, they could influence my decisions and feel like they still had power over my life. Jake represented independence, a future they couldn't control, and that threatened the dynamic they'd established. So because I'm happy and building a life with someone I love, I'm no longer your daughter. Don't be dramatic, Harper. Nobody said you're not our daughter. But if you want to be part of this family, you need to show that family comes first. That means ending this live-in situation with Jake and moving back home until you're ready to make more mature decisions. I hung up the phone and sat on my couch for 30 minutes, just processing what had happened. My own mother had just given me an ultimatum: break up with Jake and move back home, or lose my family entirely. There was no middle ground, no room for discussion, no acknowledgement that I was an adult capable of making my own choices. Jake came home early that day, bringing Thai food and flowers because he sensed I was having a hard time. When I told him about the conversation with my mom, his face went through about 5 different emotions before settling on protective anger. "They want you to choose between me and them," he said, setting down the food without opening it. "They're making you pick sides instead of accepting that you can love both your family and your partner." "What if they're right, though?" I asked, hating myself for the doubt in my voice. "What if I am being selfish and immature?" Jake sat down next to me and took my hands in his. "Harper, you work 40 hours a week, you pay your rent on time, you graduated college with honors, and you treat everyone in your life with kindness and respect. You volunteer at the animal shelter on weekends, you send your grandma birthday cards, and you've never once asked me to pay for anything I couldn't afford. In what universe is that selfish or immature?" He was right, but years of conditioning don't disappear overnight. I'd been programmed to believe that disagreeing with my parents meant I was disrespectful, that choosing my own path meant I was selfish, that prioritizing my happiness meant I was immature. Breaking free from that programming would take more than one conversation, no matter how logical Jake's points were. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about Sarah's baby shower, imagining my family gathered in the living room, where I'd opened Christmas presents every year for 2 decades, talking and laughing without me. I wondered if anyone would ask where I was, or if they'd just accept my parents' explanation that I was being difficult and move on with the celebration. The next morning, I got a text from Emma. "Mom told me you're not coming to the shower. I don't understand what's happening, but I miss you. Can we talk?" That simple message broke something open in my chest. Emma was 17, caught in the middle of this mess, probably confused and scared about what it meant for our family. I couldn't drag her into the conflict, but I also couldn't abandon her completely. I called her that afternoon, and we talked for 2 hours. She told me that the baby shower had felt weird without me, that several relatives had asked where I was, and that Mom and Dad had given vague answers about me being busy with work. She said Levi had asked her privately if she knew what was really going on, and she'd told him about the text message. Levi said Dad was being ridiculous, Emma told me. He said, "You're the most responsible person he knows, and he doesn't understand why they're so upset about you living with Jake." That surprised me. Levi had always been careful not to contradict our parents, always played the role of the dutiful son who never caused waves. The fact that he defended me, even in a private conversation with Emma, felt like a small victory, but it also made me realize how calculated this whole situation was. Dad hadn't just spontaneously decided to change the locks in a moment of anger. This was planned, strategic, designed to force me into compliance through isolation and public humiliation. He'd probably been building up to this ultimatum for months, waiting for the right moment to make his move. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. Not just sad or hurt, but genuinely angry at the manipulation and control tactics. I was an adult with my own life, my own home, my own career, and my own relationship. The idea that I needed my parents' permission to live with my boyfriend was absurd. The idea that I should prioritize their comfort over my own happiness was even more absurd. 3 days after the baby shower, I got a call from my Aunt Linda. She'd gotten my number from Emma and wanted to check on me because she'd noticed my absence at the party. "Your mom said you were dealing with some work stuff, but something felt off about the way she said it," Linda told me. "I've known your mother for 25 years, and I can tell when she's not being completely honest." I'd always loved Aunt Linda. She was Mom's younger sister, but they couldn't have been more different. Linda was a nurse who'd traveled the world, married and divorced twice, and had no children by choice. She'd always been the family member who asked real questions and gave honest answers, even when they made people uncomfortable. I told her everything. The text message, the ultimatum, the changed locks, the demand that I choose between Jake and my family. Linda listened without interrupting, occasionally making small sounds of disbelief or frustration. "Honey," she said when I finished, "I love my sister, but this is absolutely insane. You're a grown woman in a healthy relationship, supporting yourself and living your own life. The fact that they're trying to control you like this is honestly embarrassing." Hearing validation from someone in my family felt like being thrown a lifeline. For days I'd been second-guessing myself, wondering if maybe I was overreacting or being too sensitive. Linda's clear, unambiguous support reminded me that this situation was not normal, not healthy, and not something I should tolerate. "What do you think I should do?" I asked her. "I think you should live your life and let them figure out whether they want to be part of it or not," she said firmly. "You can't control their choices, but you can control yours. Don't let them hold your relationship hostage." That conversation with Linda marked a turning point for me. I stopped trying to figure out how to fix things with my parents and started focusing on protecting the life I'd built. If they wanted to be part of my future, they'd have to accept me as I was, not as they wanted me to be. But I underestimated how far they were willing to go to maintain control. The following week, I started getting calls from other family members. First, my cousin Michael called to tell me that Mom had mentioned I was going through a rebellious phase and might need some family guidance to get back on track. Then my grandmother called, clearly having been fed a version of events that painted me as the problem. She lectured me for 20 minutes about the importance of family loyalty and respecting my elders. The most painful call came from my Uncle Tony, Dad's brother, who'd always been like a second father to me. He called on a Wednesday evening while I was making dinner, and his tone was stern in a way I'd never heard before. "Harper, I don't know what's gotten into you lately, but this behavior has to stop," he said without any preamble. "Your parents are good people who've given you everything, and the way you're treating them is shameful." "Uncle Tony, did they tell you what actually happened?" I asked, stirring the pasta sauce and trying to keep my voice steady. "I know you're living in sin with some boy instead of focusing on your education and your future. I know you've been disrespectful and ungrateful, and now you're punishing your family because they're trying to help you make better choices. Living in sin. That's how they described my relationship with Jake to my extended family. Not living with her boyfriend or in a committed relationship, but living in sin like it was 1950, and unmarried couples were still scandalous. Uncle Tony, I graduated from college 2 years ago with honors. I have a full-time job in my field, I pay all my own bills, and I'm in a healthy, loving relationship with someone who treats me well. In what way is that shameful? Don't get smart with me, young lady. Marriage comes before moving in together. Education comes before boys. Family comes before everything else. These are basic values, and if you can't understand that, then maybe your parents are right to be concerned. I hung up on him. I'd never hung up on a family member before in my life, but I couldn't listen to another word of that lecture. The hypocrisy was staggering. Uncle Tony had lived with his now wife for 3 years before they got married, and nobody had called that living in sin or questioned his values. That night, Jake found me crying at our kitchen table, surrounded by tissues and my laptop. I'd been researching apartments, thinking maybe I needed to move out to prove some point about independence, even though logically I knew that was ridiculous. They're turning everyone against me, I told him, closing the laptop and wiping my eyes. They're making me sound like this irresponsible, disrespectful person who's throwing her life away for a man. How many of these family members have actually talked to you directly about your life? Jake asked, sitting down across from me. Not about what your parents told them, but actually asked you about your job, your goals, your happiness. I thought about it for a minute. None of them. They're all reacting to whatever version of the story my parents told them. So they're making judgments about your character and your choices based on secondhand information from people who are clearly biased and upset. Does that seem fair to you? It didn't seem fair, but fairness wasn't the point anymore. The point was power and control, and my parents were willing to weaponize the entire extended family to get their way. 2 weeks after the lock incident, I got a letter in the mail from my parents' lawyer. Not from my parents directly, but from their attorney on official letterhead, delivered via certified mail. I had to sign for it, which felt surreal and terrifying. The letter informed me that I was no longer authorized to enter my parents' property, that any attempt to do so would be considered trespassing, and that they were prepared to pursue legal action if I continued to harass them with phone calls or text messages. It also stated that they were no longer financially responsible for me in any way, including health insurance coverage under their plan. I read that letter 3 times before the words fully sank in. My own parents had involved lawyers. They'd taken steps to legally prevent me from coming home, from setting foot on the property where I'd grown up, where my childhood bedroom still contained stuffed animals and high school photos and the glow-in-the-dark stars I'd stuck to the ceiling when I was 12. The health insurance thing was particularly cruel because they knew I'd been struggling to afford the insurance through my employer. I'd been staying on their family plan to save money while I built up my emergency fund, which they'd actually encouraged me to do just 6 months earlier. Now suddenly, that financial responsibility was being cut off as punishment for not obeying their ultimatum. Jake was at work when the letter arrived, so I sat alone in our apartment for 2 hours, just holding that piece of paper and trying to process what it meant. This wasn't just about disapproval anymore. This wasn't just about them wanting me to make different choices. This was warfare. When Jake got home, he found me on the couch, still holding the letter, staring at nothing. What happened? He asked immediately, dropping his bag and sitting next to me. I handed him the letter without saying anything. I watched his face change as he read it, saw his jaw clench and his eyes narrow. "This is insane," he said finally. "They're treating you like a criminal instead of their daughter." "Maybe I should just call them," I said, hating how small my voice sounded. "Maybe I should apologize and try to work things out." "Harper, look at me." Jake took my hands and waited until I met his eyes. "What exactly would you be apologizing for? For being an adult? For having a job? For being in love? For living your own life?" He was right, but the conditioning was so deep. Part of me still believed that if I just tried harder, if I just found the right words or made the right concessions, I could fix this. Part of me still believed that family harmony was more important than personal integrity. "They're my parents," I whispered. "I don't know how to not have parents." "You'll always be their daughter," Jake said softly. "But that doesn't mean you have to accept abuse and manipulation to maintain a relationship with them. Love shouldn't come with ultimatums." That evening, Emma called me crying. She'd overheard Mom and Dad talking about the lawyer letter, and she was horrified that they'd gone that far. She told me that the atmosphere at home had become toxic, with Dad constantly ranting about respect and responsibility, and Mom walking around with this martyred expression like she was the victim in all of this. "I don't understand why they're being so crazy about this," Emma sobbed into the phone. "Jake seems nice, you seem happy, and you're doing fine on your own. Why can't they just be glad you're okay?" "Because it's not about me being okay," I told her, finally understanding the truth myself. It's about them being in control. They can't control Jake, and they can't control our relationship, so they're trying to control me by making me choose. Emma was quiet for a moment. "Are you going to choose them?" I don't know, Em. I honestly don't know. But even as I said it, I knew that wasn't true. I did know. I just wasn't ready to admit it yet. The breaking point came 3 weeks later, at my cousin Sarah's baby's baptism. I hadn't been invited, hadn't even known it was happening until Emma texted me the morning of the ceremony. But Jake and I were having lunch at a restaurant downtown when I saw them through the window, my entire extended family walking out of the church across the street in their Sunday best. I watched my parents, my grandparents, my aunts and uncles and cousins, all dressed up and smiling, celebrating this important family milestone without me. I saw Levi carrying Sarah's baby, probably standing in as godfather. I saw Emma in a dress I'd never seen before, looking grown up and beautiful. I saw my life continuing without me, and for a moment I felt this overwhelming urge to run across the street and apologize for everything, to beg them to let me back in. But then I saw something that changed everything. My cousin David, Sarah's brother, was walking a few feet behind the group with his boyfriend Chris. David had come out 2 years earlier, and while it had been awkward at first, the family had eventually accepted Chris and treated him like any other in-law. They'd been together for 4 years, living together for 2, and nobody had ever suggested that David was living in sin or making irresponsible choices. David and Chris were holding hands, laughing about something, fully integrated into the family celebration. Chris was carrying the diaper bag, helping with baby logistics, clearly considered part of the family despite not being married to David. That's when I realized the rules were different for me. David got to bring his boyfriend to family events, got to live with his partner without judgment, got to make his own choices about his relationship timeline. But somehow my situation was different. Somehow my choices were threatening and disrespectful, while his were just part of growing up. The double standard was so glaring, so obvious, that I felt stupid for not seeing it before. This wasn't about values or family traditions or religious beliefs. This was about me specifically, about their need to control me specifically, about their inability to accept that I had opinions and preferences that differed from theirs. I pulled out my phone and called my dad right there from the restaurant. He answered on the second ring, and I could hear the sounds of the post-baptism gathering in the background, multiple conversations, children laughing, the clink of dishes being served. "Harper?" His voice was cautious, surprised. "I saw you at the church," I said, without preamble. "I saw the whole family celebrating together while I'm banned from even setting foot on your property. And I noticed that David and Chris were there, holding hands, fully accepted despite living together unmarried for 2 years." There was a long pause. I could hear him moving away from the noise, probably stepping outside or into another room. "That's completely different," he said finally. "How? How is it different? David and Chris have been together longer. They're more serious about their commitment. Jake and I have been together for 4 years. We live together, we share finances, we're talking about engagement. How much more serious do we need to be?" "It's not the same thing, Harper, and you know it." "No, I don't know it." "Explain to me how it's different." Another long pause. I could hear voices in the background, calling his name, probably wondering where he'd gone. "Chris comes from a good family. He has a stable career. He's proven himself to be responsible and mature. Jake has a college degree and a full-time job as a graphic designer. He's never been arrested, never been in debt, never treated me with anything but respect and love. What exactly has he not proven?" "This conversation is over, Harper. You're being deliberately difficult, and I won't stand here and justify our family's values to you. Your family's values apparently include lying to relatives about why I'm not at family events, turning my siblings against me, and hiring lawyers to threaten your own daughter. Are those the values you want me to respect?" He hung up on me. I sat there in the restaurant, holding my phone, feeling Jake's concerned eyes on me across the table. The family celebration was still happening across the street, and I could see them through the window, all gathered in the church fellowship hall now, probably sharing cake and coffee and stories about the beautiful ceremony. "I need to go over there," I said suddenly. "Harper, you could get arrested for trespassing," Jake said gently. "I don't care. This ends today." I stood up and walked out of the restaurant before Jake could stop me. I heard him behind me, calling my name, but I was already crossing the street, already walking up the steps to the fellowship hall, already pushing open the door to face whatever came next. The room went quiet when I walked in. Not silent, but noticeably quieter, as conversations died and heads turned. My parents were standing near the dessert table, my dad holding a cup of coffee, and my mom arranging plates. They both froze when they saw me. I walked straight toward them, aware that everyone was watching, aware that I was about to either repair this relationship or burn it down completely. "We need to talk," I said when I reached them. "You're not supposed to be here," Mom said quietly, glancing around at our audience. "I'm your daughter. I've been part of this family for 24 years, and I deserve to be here for important moments like this." "You made your choice," Dad said, setting down his coffee cup. "You chose Jake over family, and now you're dealing with the consequences." "I didn't choose Jake over family. I chose to be an adult with my own life and my own relationship. Those aren't the same thing." People were definitely listening now, even though they were pretending to have their own conversations. I could see my grandmother watching us with wide eyes, my Aunt Linda looking concerned, my cousin David standing with Chris near the wall. "You chose to live in sin, instead of respecting the values we raised you with," Dad said, his voice getting louder. "David and Chris have been living together for 2 years," I said, pointing toward my cousin. "Are they living in sin too?" Dad's face flushed red. "That's completely different. Because they're men? Because Chris has the right family background? Because they've been together longer? I've been with Jake for 4 years, Dad. 4 years of him treating me with respect, supporting my goals, and making me happy. What more do you want from him? I want you to stop embarrassing this family with your irresponsible choices." That's when something snapped inside me. All the hurt and confusion and self-doubt crystallized into pure protective anger. Embarrassing the family? I graduated college with honors. I have a career in my field. I pay my own bills. I volunteer at the animal shelter. I've never been arrested, never done drugs, never gotten in trouble with the law. I'm in a committed, loving relationship with someone who treats me well. In what universe is that embarrassing? "You're living with a man you're not married to," Mom interjected. "You're prioritizing your relationship over your family. You're being selfish and immature." "I'm being selfish by loving someone who loves me back. I'm being immature by supporting myself and making my own decisions." "You want to know what's selfish and immature? Changing the locks to keep your own daughter out, hiring lawyers to threaten me, lying to relatives about why I'm not at family events, trying to force me to choose between the man I love and my family instead of finding a way to accept both." The room had gone completely quiet now. Even the children had stopped talking, sensing the tension in the adult conversation. "We don't accept that relationship because it goes against our values," Dad said firmly. "No," I said, my voice carrying across the entire room. "You don't accept that relationship because you can't control it. You can't control Jake. You can't control our timeline, and you can't control me anymore. That's what this is really about." "You're out of line," Dad warned. "I'm out of line? You've spent 3 weeks turning my entire extended family against me based on lies and half-truths. You've banned me from family events. You've threatened me with legal action for trying to contact my own parents. You've cut off my health insurance as punishment for being happy. And I'm out of line?" I could see David and Chris whispering to each other near the wall. I could see my Aunt Linda nodding slightly, her face encouraging. I could see Emma standing in the doorway, probably having arrived late and walked into this confrontation. "You want me to respect family values?" I continued. "Here's a family value. Parents are supposed to love their children unconditionally. They're supposed to want their children to be happy and successful. They're supposed to celebrate when their children find love and build good lives. But instead of celebrating my happiness, you're punishing me for it. Instead of getting to know the man I love, you're demanding I choose between him and you. That's not family values. That's manipulation and control." "Jake is not good enough for you," Mom said suddenly, her voice shaking with emotion. "You could do so much better. You could find someone from a better family, someone with more ambition, someone who could really take care of you. Jake does take care of me. He supports my dreams. He celebrates my successes. He comforts me when I'm sad. And he loves me for who I am, not who he wants me to be. That's what real love looks like." "That's infatuation," Dad said dismissively. "You're too young to know the difference. I'm 24 years old, Dad. I'm not a teenager with a crush. I'm an adult woman in a committed relationship, and I'm tired of being treated like a child who can't make her own decisions." That's when my Aunt Linda stepped forward from where she'd been listening near the back wall. "Richard," she said, addressing my father directly, "I've been listening to this conversation and I have to say Harper is right." The room somehow got even quieter. "Linda, this is none of your business," Mom said sharply. "Patricia, she's my niece, and I love her. That makes it my business." Linda walked closer to where we were standing. I've watched Harper grow up into a responsible, caring, successful young woman. I've met Jake multiple times at family events, and he's polite, respectful, and clearly devoted to her. The fact that you're willing to lose your daughter over this is heartbreaking and honestly ridiculous. We're not losing our daughter, Dad said. We're trying to save her from making a mistake. You're trying to control her, Linda said firmly. And it's not working, because she's not a child anymore. She's an adult with her own life, and if you keep pushing, you're going to lose her permanently. I felt tears starting to burn behind my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of relief, of validation, of finally having someone in my family stand up for me publicly. Thank you, I said to Linda, my voice barely steady. Then I looked around the room at all my relatives, some of whom were meeting my eyes, others who were staring at their plates or their hands. I want everyone here to know the truth, I said, raising my voice so it carried to every corner of the room. I didn't choose Jake over family. I chose to live my own life and love who I want to love. My parents decided that wasn't acceptable, so they cut me off. They changed the locks on their house. They banned me from family events. They hired lawyers to threaten me. They lied to all of you about why I haven't been around. And they've been trying to force me to choose between the man I love and my family, instead of finding a way to accept both. I paused, looking directly at my parents. I love you both. I love this family. But I won't be blackmailed or manipulated into ending a healthy, loving relationship to make you feel more comfortable. If you want me in your life, you need to accept me as I am, not as you want me to be. Then I turned and walked out of the fellowship hall, leaving behind 20 years of family gatherings, leaving behind the illusion that love without conditions was possible in my family, leaving behind the version of myself that would sacrifice her own happiness to keep other people comfortable. Jake was waiting for me outside, leaning against his car, and when he saw my face, he didn't ask questions. He just opened his arms, and I fell into them, crying tears of grief and relief and exhaustion. How do you feel? He asked after a few minutes. Free, I said, surprising myself with the truth of it. Scared and sad and angry, but free. We drove home in comfortable silence. And that evening, Emma called to tell me that the gathering had been awkward and tense after I left, with several relatives asking pointed questions about what was really going on. She said David had told our parents they were being ridiculous and cruel, and that my grandmother had asked Mom privately why they were throwing away a perfectly good daughter over something so silly. I think you changed some minds today, Emma told me. Aunt Linda especially has been talking to everyone about how wrong this whole situation is. 3 days later, I got a text from Levi. I talked to Mom and Dad. They're being insane. You're my sister, and I love you, and I think Jake is great. Don't let them bully you into giving up your happiness. A week after that, my Uncle Tony called to apologize. He said he'd been thinking about our conversation and realized he'd judged me without knowing the full story. He asked if he could take Jake and me to dinner to get to know us better. One by one, family members started reaching out. Not all of them, but enough to make me realize that my parents' campaign to turn everyone against me had backfired. Instead of isolating me, their extreme behavior had made people question their motives and methods. But my parents themselves remained silent. No phone calls, no texts, no attempts at reconciliation. The locks stayed changed. The lawyer letter remained in effect. They had drawn their line in the sand and were apparently committed to staying on their side of it. For months, I waited for them to reach out, to apologize, to find some way to bridge the gap they'd created. I imagined dozens of scenarios where they'd realize they'd made a mistake and ask for forgiveness. I rehearsed conversations where they'd meet Jake properly and realize he was exactly the kind of man they should want for their daughter. But slowly, I stopped waiting. I stopped checking my phone hopefully every time it buzzed. I stopped crafting imaginary reconciliation speeches in my head. I started accepting that some relationships can't be repaired, that some people would rather be right than be close, that some forms of love are too conditional to be sustainable. Jake and I got engaged 6 months later, not because of my parents' ultimatum, but because we were ready, because we'd talked about our future and decided we wanted to build it together. The proposal happened on a Saturday morning in our kitchen, over coffee and pancakes, with no fanfare or fancy restaurant or elaborate planning. Just Jake getting down on one knee next to our kitchen island and saying, "I want to spend the rest of my life making you coffee in the morning and listening to you talk about your day at night. Will you marry me?" I said yes while crying happy tears into my pancakes, and we spent the day calling friends and family to share the news. Levi was thrilled, and immediately started planning his best man speech. Emma squealed with excitement and asked to help plan the wedding. My Aunt Linda cried and said she couldn't wait to celebrate with us. We didn't call my parents. We didn't send them an announcement. We didn't agonize over whether to invite them to the wedding. They had made their choice clear, and we respected it. The wedding happened 8 months later in a small ceremony at a boutique hotel downtown. We kept it intimate, 50 people who truly loved and supported us. Levi walked me down the aisle since Dad wasn't there to do it. Emma was my maid of honor, radiant in a lavender dress we'd picked out together. Aunt Linda gave a reading about love being a choice you make every day, not just a feeling you have sometimes. It was the most beautiful day of my life, made even more special by the fact that everyone there had chosen to be there, had actively supported our relationship, had celebrated our love without conditions or ultimatums. 2 weeks after our wedding, I got a card in the mail from my parents. Not a wedding gift, not an apology, just a generic thinking of you card with a brief note. We heard about your marriage. We hope you'll be happy. Love, Mom and Dad. It was such a strange, distant way to acknowledge one of the biggest moments of my life. No congratulations, no regret about missing the ceremony, no invitation to reconcile or rebuild our relationship. Just acknowledgement that something had happened and a polite hope that it would work out. I showed the card to Jake, and we both agreed it felt like a gesture without substance, a way of reaching out without actually taking responsibility or making changes. I wrote back a brief thank you note and left it at that. A year and a half later, Emma graduated from high school. She called to invite us to her graduation party, which was being held at my parents' house. She said she'd talked to them about it, and they'd agreed that Jake and I could attend as long as we kept things civil. The implication that we were the ones who might cause problems, that we were the ones who needed to be warned about appropriate behavior, was so absurd it was almost funny. But Emma was important to us, and her graduation was a big deal, so we decided to go. The party was awkward but manageable. My parents were polite but distant, treating us like acquaintances rather than family. They made small talk about the weather and asked perfunctory questions about our jobs, but there was no warmth, no genuine interest, no acknowledgement of the elephant in the room. Other family members were warm and welcoming, eager to catch up and hear about married life. Several people complimented Jake on his outfit and asked about his work. My grandmother hugged me for a long time and whispered that she'd missed me. At one point, Jake was talking to my cousin David about graphic design, and I overheard my dad telling someone that Jake seemed nice enough in a tone that suggested this was a surprising discovery. It struck me as both progress and evidence of how prejudiced he'd been from the beginning. We stayed for 2 hours, long enough to celebrate Emma properly, but not long enough to overstay our welcome. As we were leaving, my mom walked us to the door and stood there for a moment like she wanted to say something important. "Thank you for coming," she said finally. "It meant a lot to Emma. She's important to us," I replied. "We wouldn't have missed it." Mom nodded and glanced toward the living room, where Dad was talking to my uncle. "Maybe we could have dinner sometime, just to talk." "I'd like that," I said, meaning it. "But it has to be a real conversation, Mom. Not an attempt to convince me I made the wrong choices, or that I need to change something about my life to earn your approval." "I know," she said quietly. "I think I'm starting to understand some things I didn't before." That dinner happened 3 weeks later, at a neutral restaurant downtown. It was stilted and careful, but it was a beginning. Mom asked about our apartment, our jobs, our plans for the future. She apologized for missing the wedding, though she didn't apologize for the circumstances that led to her absence. Dad didn't come to that dinner, and Mom didn't explain why. She just said he needed more time to process everything, which I interpreted as him being too proud to admit he'd been wrong. Over the next several months, Mom and I had a few more careful conversations. She started acknowledging that Jake made me happy, that our relationship was stable and healthy, that maybe her initial concerns had been overblown. She never apologized for the locks or the lawyer letter or the family manipulation campaign, but she seemed to be quietly accepting that those tactics had been extreme and counterproductive. Dad, meanwhile, maintained his distance. When I'd see him at family events, he was civil but cold, treating me like a prodigal daughter who'd caused unnecessary drama rather than a woman who'd stood up for herself against unreasonable demands. It took me a long time to accept that this might be as good as our relationship ever got. He might never apologize. He might never acknowledge that his ultimatum was unfair and manipulative. He might always believe that I chose Jake over family instead of recognizing that they forced me to make that choice. But I've learned that you can't control other people's capacity for growth or self-reflection. You can only control your own choices and responses. I chose to protect my relationship and my happiness. I chose to surround myself with people who love me unconditionally. I chose to build a life based on my own values rather than someone else's expectations. Jake and I have been married for 2 years now, and our relationship has only gotten stronger. We bought a house 6 months ago, a little 2-bedroom bungalow with a backyard where we're planning to plant a garden this spring. We talk about having kids someday, about the kind of family we want to create together. Emma visits us regularly and has become close with Jake, often asking his advice about college applications and career choices. Levi brings his family over for holidays, and our kids will grow up knowing each other well. My Aunt Linda treats Jake like the son-in-law she never had, and my grandmother always asks about him when we talk on the phone. The family I chose has proven to be more loyal and supportive than the family I was born into. That shouldn't be surprising, but it was a hard lesson to learn. If you're watching this and dealing with controlling family members who are trying to manipulate you into choosing between them and your happiness, I want you to know that you're not selfish for choosing yourself. You're not disrespectful for wanting to be treated like an adult. You're not wrong for refusing to accept ultimatums and emotional blackmail. Love shouldn't come with conditions. Real love celebrates your happiness, supports your choices, and wants what's best for you, even when that's different from what they want for you. Real love doesn't threaten to withdraw unless you comply with demands. Some specific advice. First, document everything if the situation gets legal or involves threats. Keep screenshots of texts, save voicemails, maintain records of conversations. You might need them later if things escalate. Second, build and maintain relationships with people who support you unconditionally. Family can be blood relatives, but it can also be friends, partners, mentors, and chosen family who show up for you consistently. Third, don't set yourself on fire to keep other people warm. You can't control how others react to your choices, but you can control whether you sacrifice your own well-being to manage their emotions. Most importantly, trust yourself. If something feels wrong or manipulative or controlling, it probably is. Don't let other people gaslight you into believing that abuse is love or that conditions are normal in healthy relationships. Your life belongs to you. Your happiness matters. Your choices are valid, and you deserve to be surrounded by people who celebrate your joy rather than punish you for it. I'm not saying it's easy to stand up to family pressure or that there won't be consequences for choosing yourself. There will be grief and guilt and moments of doubt. There will be holidays that feel empty and milestones that feel incomplete. But there will also be peace and authenticity and relationships built on genuine love rather than obligation. If you've made it through a similar situation, please let me know in the comments where you are now and how you found the strength to protect yourself. If you're currently dealing with family manipulation or ultimatums, tell me what's happening and let this community support you. None of us should have to choose between love and control, and none of us should have to face these situations alone. Thank you for watching, thank you for sharing your stories, and remember, you're not responsible for other people's emotions, but you are responsible for protecting your own well-being. Subscribe if this resonated with you, and I'll see you in the next video where we'll be talking about how to rebuild your self-worth after family trauma. Until then, be kind to yourselves and trust your instincts. You know more than you think you do.